All right, welcome back, listeners, to another episode of We Read It One Night, the podcast where we talk about the romance novels and the history, culture, and feminism that informs them. I am so excited to be joined here today by Jessica Cale, aka the founder and host of the Dirty Sexy History blog and podcast, and the author of the forthcoming book, Forbidden Fruit, The Secret Scandalous History of Contraception and Abortion. And I have already started reading this. Like, you sent it to me 2 days ago, and I'm already loving it. I'm so excited to read the full
I'm
book.
so glad to hear that. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. It's a book I wanted to write for a very long time, and I just feel so privileged that I was able to, take the time and, of course, have the interest and be able to sit down and actually write it. Um, I mean, I'm a historian anyway. Of course, I have dirty, sexy
Yeah.
history, and I have so many interests, but the history of contraception and abortion is really, that is my focus. That is something that I've been,
Hmm.
so interested in and so passionate about for such a long time. It was just amazing to get to write this book and really work
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially because, publishing, traditional publishing, I used to work in traditional publishing. I'm hoping to still be in that world, but it can be kind of cagey and, risk averse is the
Hmm.
most professional way of putting it. And abortion is a hot topic, especially now, especially with the Dodd's decision and Roe v. Wade being
Hmm.
overturned. And you talk about that in the introduction and, the preface to your book.
Yeah.
So it is really wonderful to see like a, big traditional publisher stepping up and promoting and, publishing this book.
Oh, that's right. And I feel so blessed to be with Putnam too. And it's so funny when I was going through I mean a lot of the different sources that I used like from the 20th century, people like Simone de Beauvoir and all these major, feminist writers,
Hmm.
a lot of them were also published by Putnam. So I mean I feel like this
Oh,
imprint, they're just such badasses and I've really
yeah.
enjoyed the whole process.
Yeah, that's really cool so that you're part sort of that continuing
It's
literary
incredible, isn't it?
history.
It's
Yeah.
so humbling. There I'm I have to say when I found this one copy of the Simone de Beauvoir, I saw who because I put everything in the bibliography, I saw who published it and I actually kind of teared up for a second. I was like, "Oh my God."
Oh, I
So
love that.
it was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And I saw there's a chapter on Comstock and the Comstock laws, and I was like, oh, I wonder
Yes.
whether she talks about Madame Restell because
Oh
I
yeah.
did have like one of my former colleagues, like she did the Jennifer Wright biography on
Oh,
Madame
that's
Restell.
amazing book. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
And I loved that book. And I was like, I just want to like take this book and like throw it at anyone that says like abortion and birth control are newfangled. And so like now
Uh-huh.
I can't wait to get like a physical copy of this book. So now I have like two projectiles to pull on.
If you miss with the first one, you've always got a second
Right.
shot.
I got it,
Yeah.
and I don't have great aim. So it's good that there's another one I can throw.
I'll send you a couple of copies. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Just launch them, from I live in a
Yeah.
very politically purple area. So there's definitely people I can
Okay.
launch them at.
So a lot of people to throw the books at. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I totally
absolutely.
understand the impulse. Yeah.
Yeah. Your book starts out with the threat of a bang, right? Because you talk
It
about
does.
how you used to volunteer at Planned Parenthood as a
Hmm.
teenage educator and someone shot a pipe bomb at it. And thankfully, they didn't do a very good job making the pipe bomb.
Yeah.
And, no one was hurt, but it's like a
Hmm.
very real threat.
It was a pretty crazy experience. And I mean, yeah, I mean, they are your formative years. I mean, I wouldn't say that that was what made me interested in contraception because I mean, I was already interested in
Right.
contraception and sex
Right.
education. When I was like 16, 17, I was involved in this really cool program that Planned Parenthood used to run. I don't know if they still do. It was called the Teen Council Program, where they train these different, high school students who volunteer and the
Mhm.
idea is that you can go in and kind of teach these one-off sex education classes because they thought at the time, this is like the early 2000s, and we were really trying to work on bringing down, like the rates of teenage pregnancy. They
Yeah.
really thought that if we could go into schools, maybe the other students would listen to us. Maybe they aren't listening to the
Mhm.
teachers, but maybe they would feel less self-conscious asking another 17-year-old a question. Well,
Yeah.
do condoms expire or what is spermicide or whatever?
Yeah.
So, I was trained to be part of this program, and I was volunteering at Planned Parenthood at the time. And that night, I was not there. as you know, as a member for one of these meetings, I was actually in the laundromat next door,
Mhm.
and I was taking the laundry out to the car, and this pickup truck on the opposite side of the parking lot had some kind of like trebuchet or some really weird device in the back.
Yeah.
I don't know what the heck it was, but they launched something at the window of the Planned
Mm.
Parenthood. And thankfully, it just bounced off like it was nothing. It landed in the ditch and started smoking. And I thought, what in the hell was that? And then, later on when I looked it up, it was actually a faulty pipe bomb, and it only missed my head by a couple of feet. And I mean, they
Jeez.
panicked. They sped out of the parking lot. But if they had known how to put one together, I mean, it would have killed everybody on the block. So that was pretty scary. But they were trying to attack the Planned Parenthood. And of course, it wasn't the first time it had happened. These things happen all the time. They're becoming more and more common. I mean, where I grew up, Rochester, Minnesota, right? Minnesota is a very blue state. But,
Right.
Planned Parenthood obviously is not without controversy. Since the 70s, this, anti-abortion rhetoric has gotten more and more violent. And certainly as I was growing up, we were seeing clinics being attacked all the time, providers being threatened and sometimes assassinated. It's absolutely horrific that these things are happening. So that was, just one of a series of things that happened against clinics. And fortunately, no one was hurt that time. Thank God for that. But yeah, it was pretty scary. You're a high school student, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden somebody's throwing a bomb at your head. It
Yeah.
was pretty crazy. And then, of course, I called the police and they didn't take it seriously. They just said, "Oh, well, it's just a prank or whatever," which
That
is just
infuriated
crazy.
me to read that part where you
Just
said they didn't believe
crazy.
you.
Yeah. Oh man. So
Especially when there's
anyway,
like the physical bomb
it was in
there.
the
It
ditch,
was
like it was
still
still
there.
there.
Like you have
Yeah.
physical evidence. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that
Yeah.
made me very upset for past you to
Uh-huh.
read
And
that.
nothing ever happened. Nothing
Yeah.
happened. And then a year later, I went to college in the UK, and I didn't think about it for a few years. But, I've always been very interested in the history of birth control and abortion.
Mm,
And, I never forgot that that happened to me, obviously. It's kind
yeah.
of hard to forget. But, I was interested in these things. And in the years since then, I mean, it's been 20 years since then.
Mhm.
Really, like, these attacks have just become more and more common.
Yeah.
And I know you haven't got to this part of the book yet, but in the end of the book, I talk about how Donald Trump and JD Vance have said that they're not
Mhm.
going to enforce the FACE Act anymore, which protects clinics and volunteers and providers against this kind of violence. And since then, of course, then these attacks have also ramped up. And since they've overturned
Right.
Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs decision, it's become
Mhm.
more and more common. It's almost encouraged. And that really, it just sickens me. It really does. So
Mhm.
the book, it's not only about what's going on in America today. It is a very good overview, I would say, of the
Mhm.
history of contraception and abortion going all the way back to Mesopotamia. But what I'm trying to do with it is to, answer the question, how did we get here? Like, how did this happen in America? Why is
Mhm.
it so controversial now when historically it just wasn't a big deal? You know,
Yeah.
People didn't really have a problem with abortion like they do now. So that
Yeah.
was something that I really wanted to get that across. I really wanted people to understand that, the idea that, oh, abortion never existed, or it was always this evil, that it's just not
Yeah.
true. It was just really common and, kind of
Yeah.
boring.
No, yeah, no, and I love that. And I think, when we're also looking at like romance novels and particularly historical romance novels, like when you see birth control and reproductive health care being addressed in historicals, you get so many people being like, that's not historically accurate. Like, what are you doing? This is too
No.
modern. And listener, we're talking about, one of Sarah MacLean's books today, and that's a criticism that I see every time for like all of her
Mhm.
books. I see in the reviews like this is too modern. These are too many modern sentiments in my historical. And it's like it's not.
It's not
You're
at
the one
all.
being backwards, if anything,
Hmm.
by, putting your 1950s mid-century like morality on past people.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And it is also like my background as a writer of historical romance and as somebody who
Yeah.
has always read a lot of it and really enjoyed it that also made me want to write this book. Of course, I mean for it to be for everybody, and I think that everybody is going to be able to take something from it.
Mhm.
But my initial thought was like this could be almost like a handbook for historical romance authors.
Yeah.
Because I think that people have this wrong idea about romance that we don't try or we don't research or we
Yeah.
just make things up, right? The idea that these things are inaccurate, which I think is so insulting. I
Mhm.
mean, like with my own books, and then also, I mean, I edited romance for other people for years,
Yeah.
hundreds of books. I know how hard these authors work and how much
Yeah.
research they pour into them. A lot of romance authors know more about these periods than hardcore historians, you know?
Right.
And I love that and I respect that. And I want to make this part of it easier for them. I think a lot of people do know or have some inkling that, contraception may have existed in the past, abortion may have existed. And a lot of people know maybe a little bit about it, but would
Mhm.
like to know more. So what I wanted to do with this book was put as much information as possible in one place. I want to make
Yeah.
your research easier.
Yeah.
So all the different, the different chapters, I go through the different time periods, the different locations, the different methods, and I do go into, specific recipes, specific applications, how
Yeah.
they worked, why they worked, and I just want to make it as simple as possible for people who
Yeah.
want to use this for their own research. And of course, I think that anybody, can enjoy it. I think there are a lot of really interesting and funny and maybe disgusting
Yeah,
anecdotes,
the
but I
crocodile
like to think
dung.
the crocodile
Yeah.
thing, I think it's entertaining on its own anyway, but I'm also hoping it's going to be useful for
Mhm.
people to really show, to really make the point that this stuff has always been with us. It has always
Yeah.
existed, and it always will.
I'm so glad that you said that like you sort of intended it as a guide because like I like as someone who is also a writer who like has written historical like one day hopes to like actually publish a historical that does deal with reproductive issue. I was like, "Oh, like let me just like when I get the physical book, I'm gonna have my highlighter and my,
Oh
to
yeah,
like for later to know this." So
absolutely.
it's really nice to hear that you have that as, as a goal in writing this book.
Of course. I hope that people highlight the hell out of it. And I do want it to be
Mhm.
useful to people. And when you get there, you'll see as well, it has about 67 pages of endnotes. So I'm not shy about including my own sources, right? So I talk about the things that I find, quite interesting. And I do talk about, certain recipes. But if you do, look at the endnotes, you'll see exactly where I got these. So if you are interested and you want to get more into it, I fully encourage people to look for these sources to find them. A lot of them are
Yeah.
available online, other ones are available through libraries. Some of them are, like on JSTOR or Ebo.
Yeah.
These are things that you can access yourself. So, for example, in the medieval chapter, I've got a couple of recipes from this amazing book that was written by Pope John the 21st. He included more than
Yeah.
30 recipes for abortifacients in that book. And I didn't include all of them in mine, but I tell you where you can find it if you want to look them
Yeah.
up. So all of these
Yeah.
are in there. And, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. I want people to look at this stuff. I want you to do your own research,
Yeah.
follow up with it if you want to, or just read it for fun. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of good information in there, and I want people to have it.
Right. And as you say in the book, but also just listener, like the recipes are there. Don't use them. Use like
Don't
modern
actually,
medicine
yeah,
does exist, but
right, yeah.
it is
Use
interesting
them
to
in your
see them.
fiction. Do not use
Right.
them in real life.
Right.
Please. Yeah, because obviously these things could go very wrong. I don't want
Right.
anybody actually trying to do these things at home.
But looking back to like this discussion within the context of romance novels as well,
Mhm.
like we've seen over the past 20, I mean, just like in the 21st century, how condoms and birth control and discussion of STIs and reproductive health has been like nothing to there was a crinkle of a wrapper to now like especially in contemporaries, but even in historicals as well. Like if they're not having a discussion about at least like I'm on the pill, I was tested recently and I don't, I don't have anything or something. I, as a reader, am like, oh, she's going to be pregnant. Like, I'm
Me
assuming
too.
that
Yeah.
pregnancy is going to be like a plot point because they didn't. So it's like it's that complete reversal. And so what are some things that like you think have instigated that change like in romance in books over the past 20 years? Like just like as a historian, as someone who like pays attention to that.
Well, I wish I could give you a really good answer for this, and I am not the authority on it, but I can give you some thoughts. I know that there was a push for including mentions of condoms around the time that AIDS was a big deal, you know.
Mhm.
Obviously, AIDS is still a big deal, but you know, when it was, you know, kind of pandemic proportions, and when people were trying to push that sex education, trying to reduce the numbers of people contracting HIV and AIDS, you know, there was more of an emphasis of let's get this information out there. Let's make people aware that they need to be using condoms. And it became, you know, a public health thing, a very important. And, you know, I think that they did a really great job of getting that across. I mean, all of this happened when I was 8 years old, and I knew everything about
Right.
condoms, you know, just because it was everywhere, you know. It was on TV, it was in music, it was everywhere. And around this time, you know, that was when they started, you know, incorporating that into these kind of novels. And of course, I know that because, you know, a few years later, I was reading all of my grandma's books, you know, and there it was. So I think that there's that. Personally, I appreciate it when people include that stuff because as a reader, I kind of fixate on these things. So it's so funny. This is how I actually got interested in the history of contraception was from reading romance novels and, you know, from watching historical dramas and things. And people would be having these incredible affairs and, you know, they'd be having sex all over the place. And I would wonder, like, how are they not getting pregnant? What is going on here? And obviously,
Yeah.
it's fiction. You can do whatever you want with fiction. It's not real
Right.
life.
We see rakes in historical romance. We're like, no one has syphilis or gonorrhea.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd think about it and like, okay, so in real life, people were also probably having affairs. People were also having premarital sex,
Mhm.
extramarital sex. People were having these relationships and maybe not wanting to get pregnant. So, how did they do that? You know? So that was how I started really getting interested in it. And I got interested in it in a really, really early age. And of course, you know, I started volunteering for Planned Parenthood. You know, that's how all that stuff happened with Teen Council. And then I moved to the UK, and my first degree that I did was a double major in ancient and medieval history, and that was really my gateway into researching this stuff. Now, not a lot of universities do have classes on that yet. I would love to see that change, but it became, you know, my own personal passion project, and it's something that I've been working on for about 20 years is just trying to answer that question I had as like a 12-year-old, right? Like, how are these people not just pregnant all the time, you know?
Yeah.
So that's what this book is. It's trying to answer that question. What were
Oh,
people
beautiful.
doing? Did they have anything? And it turns out they had a lot of things that they tried.
Had a lot.
So it's an
Right.
interesting story, you know?
Right. Just how woven it is into human history. And I mean, we do see, like the oldest profession is sex work, whatever. Like
Mhm.
that's like bandied about, right? And it makes sense. Like if the oldest profession is sex work, then one of the oldest like medical developments is contraception and abortion.
Right, right. Absolutely. And it is tied in with sex work, certainly, but also just for normal people, just for survival, you know. So one of the things that you see in some of these really early sources, which is really interesting, is people making the argument that you need to be using contraception or practicing abortion if somebody is breastfeeding. So now a lot of people say, oh, well, contraception didn't exist in the past because they were breastfeeding and then they couldn't get pregnant. But that's
Mhm.
actually not true. You can get pregnant when you're breastfeeding. So some of these very early sources are saying it is very, very important. If a woman is lactating, if she's breastfeeding, she has a small infant, if she gets pregnant, then she must abort because if she stops lactating, that baby's going to starve. They didn't
Ah,
have formula, right? So they would tell
right.
you to, you know, like abstain or if you can't, to use contraception, or if you accidentally become pregnant, then you should have an abortion for the sake of the baby that has already been born. So that is really, really interesting. So this is just for, you know, just for any woman who, or for anybody who's had a baby.
Yeah.
But then of course, sex workers, and of course, you know, the earliest civilizations, you know, when food could be scarce, it was important to control the population to make sure that everybody can be fed. Obviously, infanticide is a thing that has always been a thing. I don't talk about that in the book because I think that that is a separate issue.
Yeah.
But we do know for sure that abortion predates recorded history, and it was pretty instrumental to our evolution as a species. And if this is something that people are interested in, I can recommend this amazing book. It's called Eve by Kat Bohannon. She
Mhm.
talks about that evolutionary side of it in
Yeah.
much greater detail. And she's really like she's the expert on that. So if you guys are interested in that side of it, then definitely check that out.
Mhm. So, I think that romance and, like women's sexuality and reproductive health and, women's lib as a whole are sort of inextricably linked, right? Like the romance
Mhm.
genre, even if it's for everyone of all genders, all sexualities, is still very much rooted in womanhood and, women's rights. So how do you sort of view like the relationship between the romance genre, like in terms of like both how it helps progress like reproductive health and freedom and knowledge, and like also do you see like a bad side to it too, where it sort of helps undermine that?
Well, honestly, if I'm speaking from my own experience, I think that romance is incredibly feminist and progressive and revolutionary. I think it's amazing. I've been reading it since I was way too young to be reading it, and it only really had a good effect on my life. So, people like to say like, "Oh, well." I don't know if people should be reading that. It gives them unreasonable expectations, and oh, it's just a fantasy. And why would anybody expect their life to be like that? But for me, I really took it like literally. I'd be reading it in high school and be like, why can't my life be like that? You know what? I
Yeah.
think my life can be like that, and I think it's gonna be like that.
Mhm.
And it was, I took it almost as like an instruction manual. I would read these books about these incredible women, like these strong, brave women, in all periods of history, doing these amazing things, leading armies, or maybe just going to college, or leaving abusive relationships, or following their dreams, right? And it wasn't even always about the central relationship, which of course is important, but think of all the other things that they were doing,
Mhm.
it was also about that evolution of the self and the becoming the best version of yourself that you can be, and that
Mhm.
wish fulfillment of like, you know what? I don't need to settle for this. I can follow my dreams and I can have whatever I want. And I think I read that at the exact right age because that was always what I wanted to do. I could have stayed in my hometown. I could have married one of these disappointing guys that I went to high school with, and I
Yeah.
didn't do that. I read these books and I thought I can do that. I can do anything I want. So,
Yeah.
maybe that was a little bit unrealistic, but I mean, it worked out for me
No.
because I went to college in the UK. I studied medieval history. I became a historian. I wrote books. I married this amazing guy who really is like a real life romance hero. We've been together for 20 years. I'm very, very, very happy.
Oh.
He is very attractive and very British. It's just like a guy right out of a book, right? So
Right. Yeah, it's Darcy. There
he's
you go.
amazing. Yeah, I went to find my Mr. Darcy, right? And I met this guy at a beach party, and he was a little
Mhm.
less like Colin Firth, and like a bit more punk rock. He had like this like funky, crazy
Oh
green hair.
yeah.
He was playing the music. He's very, very, very hot. And yeah, we've been together for 20 years. We're very happy. But I didn't want to
Amazing.
settle for what was in my backyard. Like I wanted to go
Right.
out and follow my dreams like the women did in these books. These books are full of women doing impossible things.
Hmm.
And I just think that's so wonderful. And I know that you can interpret some of these like, oh, well, I don't know, is this maybe kind of like trad wife propaganda? Is it just about,
Hmm.
kind of settling down and getting married and having lots of babies?
Hmm.
And I mean, maybe a couple of books might be like that, but I think, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't, once you read a lot of these, you see that there's so much more to them than that. It's not
Hmm.
about becoming subservient to a man. It's not about
Right.
just marrying whoever and being this guy's servant and
Yeah.
finding self-actualization in that. It's not about that at all.
Yeah.
These women are kicking ass. They're taking names, right? I mean, you look at the
Hmm.
heroines in the Sarah MacLean books, like the one we're talking about
Yeah.
today. that is not a trad wife kind
Yeah.
of book,
No,
So
it's very much the opposite.
it's
Yeah.
very much the opposite. So, you can want to get married and live happily ever after, and that doesn't make you anti-feminist. You
Yeah.
can want a satisfying relationship, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just part of having a happy, fulfilled life for a lot of people. And I don't think that
Yeah.
there's anything wrong with that if that's what you want. So I don't really see them as being harmful or anti-feminist in any way. I think
Mhm.
the more of them that you read, the more that you see that they can be incredibly affirming and encouraging
Yeah.
and emotionally satisfying. And
Yeah.
I still read them. I don't really write them so much anymore, but I love reading them. And
Yeah.
you want a book that makes you feel better at the end of the day. And you
Yeah.
want to see the women get everything they want. You want to see them
Mhm.
win. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what's romance is all about. I don't want people to be sad and hopeless at the end. You want that hope, you want
Yeah,
that
yeah.
fulfillment.
Or, like forget their dreams or just, settle
Yeah.
for, whoever, oh, well,
Yeah.
my next door neighbor, I don't really like him and he forgets my birthday, but he's good enough. Like screw that. Like go out and
Yeah.
find your Prince Charming or Princess Charming or whatever.
Yeah.
Like go out and do your thing. Don't settle. It's like
Yeah.
in Ted Lasso, right? Like I don't know if you watched Ted Lasso, but
Yes.
Roy Kent says like, don't you dare
Yeah.
settle for fine. I mean, I feel like
Yeah.
that's what romance is all about. And personally, that's how I feel in my own life. I didn't want to settle for fine. And you can do crazy things. You can do brave things. You can move to the other side of the world and look for,
Yeah.
the person that makes you feel like you've been struck by lightning. That's okay. You can do that. And I think that
Yeah.
romance makes that okay.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And speaking, let's just jump into Bombshell by Sarah MacLean,
I
listener.
love this book.
Wonderful. Loved it. Even better, like the second, like this is the second time I've read it
Hmm.
and loved it even more the second time. Like it was just so, there was something toe curling about it.
Oh, it's so good. I found it satisfying on so many levels. I mean, I think that the love story is awesome. And also, like the story of the community with the women. You have the Hell's Bells
Mhm.
anyway, right? You have your four main
Yeah.
characters and they are just so amazing. They're the exact kind of
Yeah.
women that you want to read about in these books. But then, the group of women that they have in the place and the community that they're
Yeah.
involved in and all these women who are living their lives, they're doing the kind of things that they want to do. They're good friends. They're looking out for each other. They're helping women who are maybe in bad situations. And that
Mhm.
is so satisfying to see. And, I mean, to me, that is like wish fulfillment, right? Is having this community of strong women who can help each other and help others and relate to each other on that level.
Mhm.
It's almost, to me, I mean, it's almost like a book about friendship as well.
Yeah. Oh,
In addition
absolutely.
to having, of course, that awesome love story in the middle of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it is, to go back to what you were saying earlier, like it very much is, I think even like more so than other romance novels, very much is like Cecily doesn't have to compromise a single thing to
Mhm.
get everything that she wants. But that
Right.
is because she has this community that can help her like strategize and plan and get
Hmm.
everything that she wants. And Caleb, who is the hero of this, Caleb Calhoun, which I love the fact that that's like such a silly American name. And then it's like canonically because like, yeah, a 17-year-old came up with it as an
Yeah.
alias.
Yeah.
Um, but he's like ready to sacrifice at the end. And he's like,
Hmm.
like we've had a good run. Like I have to like be a man and do the right thing and protect the people that I love. And
Yeah.
she's like, and so however much Caleb is like very capable and very like, attractive because he's very competent, he's a very competent guy, he's still a man.
Yeah. And she's like, you don't have to do that. Like he's willing to sacrifice himself for the
Yeah.
people he loves. And she's just like, what's wrong with you? I've got a body. Like I can get a body. I've got one right
Yeah.
now.
Right.
And I
She's like,
love that about them. He's trying to
yeah.
do the right thing and the women just like sort it out. And I mean, I love how resourceful they are.
Yeah.
And it's so funny too. And it's like an action movie. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's because like women like we have to be more creative, like
Mhm.
especially, 200 years ago, like you in order to get what you want in a system that's working against you, and that even does still apply today, you have to think outside the box and like, know how to
Mhm.
not just like barrel in because like Caleb's done is barrel in and barrel out, his whole
Yep.
life. And Cecily has had to be more creative with the way that she problem solves.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Imogen blows up this prison cell and just calmly walks out because she's like,
Right.
who's gonna think that a woman did that? Nobody is gonna think that.
Right.
And she's absolutely right. And the women are able to function in this way, because they are overlooked as women, right? Like Abigail's
Hmm.
the spy because everyone just assumes like, oh, well, she's just quiet. No one ever thinks that she's gonna
Yeah.
be like looking at what's going on and taking these things in.
Yeah.
And Imogen, everyone thinks like, well, she's a bit weird, but she's this absolute genius when it comes to
Yeah.
explosives. And no
Yeah.
one's ever going to think that about her because people underestimate women at every turn. And that's, that happens in the book, and that's kind of how they are able to function in this way is because people do underestimate them. And I think that's so satisfying to see what they can get up to. And of course, I love the whole series as well. And we won't talk
Yeah.
about every single book, but I love the way that it unfolds. Imogen's book is my favorite, but I love this one. I
Yes,
thought
I
it was very
love.
cool.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I love Imogen's book. But yeah, the reason we're talking about this one in particular, is because Cecily is very vocally, very explicitly child free, which is
That's
something
right.
that is still kind of rare in
Hmm.
romance of all
Yes.
time period, of all subgenres. But she's very much like, I love being an aunt. I love letting my nieces and nephews, draw all over me with makeup and like do my hair in heavy quotes. And she's like, I love having them and then I love giving them back at the end of the
Yep.
day. And I don't
Yep.
want kids of my own. And there is never a moment where Caleb pushes back against that and is like,
Hmm.
no, but I want kid. Like, we would make such beautiful babies, blah, 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 blah. He's like, okay, like, great.
Yep. I'm fine with that. Yeah. And she's very firm and very clear about that. And I think that's wonderful. And she doesn't change her mind, and she doesn't have to change her mind to get the happy
Mhm.
ending, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's great.
It's so funny because the first time Cecily sort of explicitly says to Caleb, like, I don't want children. I will never want children. I'm never going to change my mind about that. Like, I don't want kids.
Hmm.
My first thought was like, oh, that's too modern for a historical. And then, automatically I was like, whoa,
Hmm.
let's walk that thought back. But like, it's still so ingrained in how we think about the past that, like, what do you
Right?
mean this woman would never want children?
Yeah, I mean, it did happen though, and I mean, people did tend to have children because, there was that expectation, that women should want
Hmm.
children, but people did everything that they could to limit the numbers when they wanted to. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that. When you look at some of these families throughout history, even if a woman has, like 5 or 6 kids, which is a lot of kids to us,
Yeah.
that still means that she was using contraception for several years of her life. Because if you are truly not using anything, you are a lot more likely to have multiple children, like a lot more than
Yeah.
3 or 5 or 6. You're going to have a lot more than that. So,
Yeah.
even just to contain it at those numbers, you're going to be using something for birth control, unless, maybe you have health issues or, maybe your husband died or something happened like that. But if
Hmm.
you are continuously sexually active, from the age of, I don't know, like 20 to 45, you're a
Right.
lot more likely to have, more than, 4 or 5 kids or whatever. So, most people in order to live that long and to not have, 12 kids, they are using
Right.
something. They are doing something to, either
Hmm.
prevent pregnancy from happening, or to, actually have abortions at quite an early stage. And that is something that the history shows as well, that both of those things were very common.
And if you look at like just like even from this time period, like George the Third, right, and
Hmm.
Queen Charlotte, who like we all know from Bridgerton and from history, they had what, like 13 kids, 14 kids. Like, how many
Mhm.
kids did they have? And so, like, here, that's a woman that's not using birth control.
Right. And a lot of these these very wealthy or aristocratic families, they did have a lot of children because that was their
Mm,
power. That was something that they were trying to do. But your average family, your average kind of working class
mhm,
family or your average family that has to think about money and how they're going to pay for things, most of them are not having 18 children.
right.
There are different periods throughout history, different places. When you do look at the figures, some families were only having one or two. It's more a lot closer to like what it is today.
Yeah.
And what people want and what people can support does change. It does
Yeah.
vary. But the evidence does suggest that, of course, people were worried about this and they did want to control the numbers as best they could. They did
Hmm.
want to be able to plan how many children they wanted to have and when they were
Hmm.
going to have them. Because I mean, for people, particularly this time period, right? This book takes place in the 1830s. The average person is not going to have the means to support a family of
Hmm.
lots and lots and lots of children. Poverty was a serious, serious issue. A lot of children died not long after they were born, just because
Hmm.
the conditions were so horrible or because their families couldn't afford to feed them or to keep them healthy, and it was very sad. So, in this time and even in the couple of centuries before, you do see a lot of people talking about how, preventing pregnancy from happening is a blessing. And
Hmm.
really having these early abortions is more humane than having a baby that is a lot more likely to die within its first, 2 years of life.
Right.
To condemn a child to be born only to die within a couple of years of something horrible, it seems very cruel to put yourself
Right.
through that and to put them through that as well. So,
Hmm.
people were trying to reduce the chances of pregnancy or to end pregnancies when they knew for sure that they weren't going to be able to support kids.
And that sort of also goes along with, even just speaking of this book, like Cecily's 28, which is like, oh my God, or she's 28 at the beginning and then 2 years pass. So then she's
And
like
then she's
30
30. Yeah.
at the end, which is like, oh my God, what a hag in a historical, you know
Yeah.
what I
Oh,
mean? Like
she's so
she's not even
old.
an
Yeah.
old maid anymore. She's
She's
an old
not old.
crone. Which is not like she's 30. Like, let's simmer
Hmm.
down, guys. But that is something that when we're especially looking at like class about how like middle class and poorer working class families had fewer children, like you also see that in terms of when people got married, right? Like
Hmm.
for aristocrats, the average age of marriage might have been like 16 or whatever,
Hmm.
but it for working class people, it was like in the 20s. It was much more similar
It
to
was
like what it
older.
was
Yeah.
today.
People tended to wait until they could afford to support a family. So,
Yeah.
in like the late 17th century, which is a period I really got into for some of my own research a few years ago, the average age of marriage for a woman in the UK, well, in England at the time, I think it was 26, and for a man, it was 28.
Wow.
So they wouldn't get married until their late 20s, but they weren't abstaining until then. They would sometimes
Right.
live together and they were having sexual relationships, but they would wait to marry until they could support a household financially.
Yeah, it just goes back to like people like to put like, oh yeah, it was normal for like a 30-year-old guy to like marry a 16-year-old back
It
then.
really
And it's like,
wasn't.
no, it wasn't. That was just like the
No.
really weird like upper 1% doing really weird upper 1% things,
Yeah, that wasn't
just like they
everybody.
do that today. They do weird
Right.
upper
That
1%,
wasn't, that wasn't the blacksmith. That wasn't the guy that worked down at the baker,
No.
like you weren't
Yeah.
marrying 12-year-old kids. That's absolutely
No.
insane. And you get too in a lot of these sources that I looked at for my book, you get a lot of these these home medical books and they call them physiology books too, which are basically like sex
Mhm.
education manuals. And you get all of these, different pamphlets from reformers and people talking about ideally, how to kind of conduct safe sexual relationships.
Yeah.
And, even at the sort of beginning of the 20th century, they were telling people you really should not attempt to have children before the age of 20 because your body isn't ready for it yet.
Yeah.
Like the idea that, oh, in the past, women were having kids throughout their teens, it's nonsense. Of course, that did
Right.
happen sometimes, but people did not unilaterally think it was a good idea, you know.
No, yeah.
Obviously children kind of grew up faster than they do now, and they were kind of treated like small adults. but that
Hmm.
doesn't mean that everybody thought that like a teenage girl was sexually mature enough to be having babies, you know?
Hmm. So, okay, so first of all, kind of separate. I remember when I first started reading Sarah MacLean, I would pronounce her name McLean. And then I
Mhm.
saw, she said, like, I heard her be like, oh, it's like John McClane from Die Hard. And like, that's
Yeah,
how I know
that's a
that,
good
like,
way to
I'm like, oh,
remember
it's
it.
like
Yeah,
Die Hard.
that's
But that
awesome.
is really relevant to this book, which kind of like starts with a bang, has a lot of
Mhm.
literal bangs in
It's
it.
a total action movie. It's awesome.
Right. And this prologue is like so cinematic in terms
Hmm.
of just like what I'm like, why can we just have this as a series? All right, there's a lot of things that I need to be made into a mini series. This is one
Hmm.
of
Oh,
them.
for sure. It's very cinematic. You can picture the whole thing. It's awesome. You know, she's it's at Vauxhall, right? So she's walking
Yeah,
through the
Vauxhall
gardens and
Gardens.
there's, all this kind of confusing stuff going on and people trying to point her this way and that way. And she's being recruited, right? Like Agents of Shield or like the A-Team. She's being
Yeah.
recruited to join this group of these women who are just
Yeah.
quietly changing the world. It's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so listener, like the premise of it is that we have this woman Duchess who is a literal Duchess,
Hmm.
but like they call her the Duchess, and she like recruits Cecily and then Adelaide, who my cat is named after, and Imogen, who's the explosive expert, and they as part of like a greater network of women, particularly working class women, take down bad men. Basically.
Yes.
And they don't do it through murder and transportation to like Australia, which I would personally would have been okay with. I don't know if you like
Yeah.
if they were telling me like, yeah, we were literally just sending them on a boat to
Yeah, no, I would
Australia, I would have been like,
100%
great.
support that. Yeah.
Right. I'd be like, but in this one, they're like writing, still basically writing in Sharpie on their forehead and then like sending them into a ballroom to embarrass them.
That was pretty funny. Although, she
Yeah.
got that woman out of the marriage to the horrible man because
Yeah.
he was so embarrassed, and then the family could, pull her out of that situation. So it
Yeah.
worked out. But that was pretty
Yeah.
funny, and you keep thinking, "Oh my God, what's going to happen to him?" And then he's just got, he's got Rotter written across his head like in Sharpie marker
Yeah.
basically. It was funny.
Yeah. I was like waiting for him to come out with like a dick drawn on his face, like fully.
Yeah.
He just rolls out with a dick on his face. But I guess Rotter works too. Fine, Sarah, if you're gonna be mature about this.
Yeah, she doesn't have to be that mature. She can get away with it.
Yeah, right. But then we have Caleb Calhoun, who's, if you've listener
Mhm.
read any other books by Sarah MacLean, he makes an appearance in The Day of the Duchess. And The Day of the Duchess and A Rogue Not Taken are Cecily's sisters. So him and Cecily always had a sort of like a flirtation. And I think initially, like Sarah didn't intend to write there. Like they were just kind of like fun side characters in Day of the Duchess. And then everyone was like, all right, so where's Caleb's and Cecily's book? And she was like, shit.
Well, it came together really well.
But yeah, so he comes, but he's been rejecting Cecily for 2 years now, basically. And I
Mhm.
did kind of wish he got like a little more slapped around for that. Cause like he's like all like shot when like multiple people are like, yeah, Cecily really likes you. Like she really likes you. And Cecily's even like, they're like, you broke her heart every time you're leaving. And he's like
Mhm.
constantly like surprised Pikachu face over it.
Yeah. Like, what? You like me?
I'm like, I can't believe it. Oh my gosh. Like this flirting has been real. So I kind of wish that he had to crawl a little bit more over broken glass
Hmm.
to like make up for breaking our girl Cecily's heart so
Yeah,
many
maybe a little
times.
bit. Yeah. And, it kept coming back to, oh, we can't be together and I must leave for reasons,
Yeah,
and in fairness, they're pretty good reasons. It makes sense
right.
at the end, but it is frustrating in the meantime. You're like, these had better be some pretty amazing reasons because this is ridiculous.
I need an explanation now, Caleb.
Yeah, I need an
Let me get it
explanation.
together.
You guys are obviously very into each other, like she's very clear about this. There's like no good reason
Right.
you can't be together. Yeah, but then it turns out there is a good
Then it
reason.
turns out,
And
yeah.
it all works out.
But it turns out like the way we find out is because Cecily's like, I will discover your
Uh-huh.
secrets. And like that's right. Like she does discover his secrets. And it's not
Hmm.
him telling her, but then in the same way, like because like he's not telling her because he's afraid that it's gonna like put her in harm's way,
Right.
right? But then by not telling her, she goes to find out herself and then gets put in harm's way.
Right. And then everybody's in harm's way because he doesn't explain it and she has to figure it out for herself. And then everything kind of explodes from there, literally and
Because
figuratively.
literally, literally and
Yeah.
figuratively, it explodes. We even get a little like roll credits moment because like Tommy Peck, the Scotland Yard inspector, like something explodes and he's like Hell's Bells, which is the name of the
Yeah.
series listener,
I love
which
that.
was very
Yeah.
cute. But yeah, it was very like the whole thing very cinematic. There's this fight scene early on when they're like fighting in a bar because um
Hmm.
they're fighting in the place, which is sort of like a women's bar, women's safe
Right.
space listener, and like all the women's safe spaces that are in Covent Garden and London in general have been like under attack in recent months. Like that's established, which I also
Hmm.
enjoyed, like the fact that Sarah snuck in so many like references to like the Sarah MacLean cinematic universe, of
Yeah.
like of all of the other characters and what they were doing with that. But they're fighting in the bar, and it felt so like Pirates of the Caribbean 3 when
It
Will
was
and
like that a bit.
Elizabeth
Yeah.
are fighting and he's like, marry us, like they're doing that, like on the pirate ship. It was like very much that.
Yeah, but they're having this incredible fight in this bar, and there's a lot of action. We know that Cecily can fight as well. She's not just
Yeah.
gonna kind of cower in a corner. She can kick some ass. And I also appreciated her description of where it was in Covent Garden, because if you've never been there, I'm sure a lot of people haven't. It really is like a maze. It is very confusing,
Mhm.
and there are all these tiny streets and little alleyways. And if you don't know exactly where you're going, I think it'd be very easy to get lost or to not
Mhm.
find a bar like this. So the idea that the place could be down one of these little alleyways and no one would be able to
Mhm.
find it if they weren't looking for it, that is very realistic.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a dodgy part of town. And also
Yeah.
very, very central. So for these women to be able to access it, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And it's part of that sort of greater women's whisper network, which like you
Yeah.
obviously talk about in Forbidden Fruit too, of like however much, I mean, in this case, someone's physically trying to suppress this whisper
Hmm.
network and this safe space in this community. However much you try to suppress it, however much you try to pretend it didn't exist, it never existed, it thrives and it continues to be passed down through the
Yes.
generations from, because like you can't stop grandmothers from passing things on to their granddaughters. That's
Hmm. Certainly, with the birth control side of it, it is passed down verbally, but you'd be surprised how much of it made it into like popular culture and media.
Mhm.
So, they had recipes for abortifacients published in, best-selling cookbooks,
Mhm.
they were in almanacs. Benjamin Franklin circulated
Yeah.
one recipe because he thought it was so important for people to know. Also, I mean, certain folk songs have,
Yeah.
cheeky references to, some of these things as well. So, I mean, it was just so much of a part of the culture. I mean, there's even a reference to it in Hamlet that most people miss.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
it really was just everywhere. And we don't necessarily see it now because we don't know what to look for anymore. But,
Mhm.
back in the day, people did know what these herbs and things were used for. So when they were hearing or seeing these references, they'd go, "Oh yeah, I know,"
Right.
But now people just go like, "Why were they so obsessed with rosemary?" You know? But, maybe there was something that they were using it for. So, it is, as you say, these networks of that information being passed down. And,
Mhm.
sometimes it can be for recipes and for things like that, or it can be for locations or networks of women who can help other women, right? Like we have in this book. And you have
Yeah.
that wonderful secret network of women, through the Duchess and through everybody that they work with, where if a woman needs help, they know who to go to and they can kind of contact
Mhm.
each other and get that help without anybody really knowing about it. So I think
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it is so interesting to see like how quickly we lose broader cultural context for things. I mean, even just like going back to
Hmm.
Shakespeare, like
Yes.
I saw like a and I maybe it was just like a rage bait. Like I have to believe that no one's this stupid, but I saw like a thread where someone was like, everyone's reading smutty books, TM nowadays. Like, why can't we just read like Shakespeare? Like Shakespeare didn't feel the need to like put like sex everywhere. And you're like, Shakespeare, every other line is a dick joke.
Every other
But
line is a dick
when you
joke.
don't
Yeah.
have the cultural context
Hmm.
for that, when like you miss out, you don't remember that, you don't know that like nothing in Much Ado About Nothing, that nothing was slang for pussy,
Right.
and so like the play is Much Ado About Pussy, but you
Uh-huh.
don't know that because we lose the cultural context. And it is like in terms of like birth control and abortion and contraceptive and reproductive care. I think especially in like modern day, because everything was sort of prior to sort of like the mid 19th century and Comstock and the American Gynecological Association, male doctors being like, "Oh, you can make money off of women, like let's swoop in here." It was
Yep.
was more like midwifery and like women passing down information about their bodies. And there is stuff like, have you found like there is stuff that like we have lost, like information that
Oh,
we just don't
100%.
have anymore because they just completely discredited, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That definitely happened. And, before we had our, kind of modern system of being able to go to the hospital and see doctors in the way that we do now. Before you would have like a doctor come to your house if you had the money to, pay them to do that. But for most people, for most households, the woman is going to be in charge of the medicine. And, there's a huge market for like home medical guides that they'll be, like as thick as the phone book, right? And they'll have remedies for everything under the sun. You know, they'll have, guides to what herbs do what to do if your kid has a fever, what to do if you have a wound somewhere, what to do if you have a headache. And some of these will have the biggest chapters about how to deal with, every single thing having to do with pregnancy. Dealing with like the process of it with childbirth, with what happens afterwards, but like also contraception, abortion, what to do if something goes wrong. So this was really interesting for me as a historian, because now I think people really demonize what they call like late term abortion, which I don't really like that term, but like an
Yeah.
abortion taking place like later on in a pregnancy, like because something has gone horribly wrong. And these guides do have remedies and things to do, what to do if you are carrying a dead fetus. If you are very sick, if this child needs to be
Mhm.
removed, how do you do that? How do you
Yeah.
handle that? So they do have these home remedies and these things that people would try because they wouldn't just let you die. They knew
Right.
that that was dangerous. They didn't want women dying of sepsis. They
Right.
didn't want women having to go through this horrible, horrible experience. I think now people just assume like, oh, well, everything to do with pregnancy or whatever, it's all natural, it'll just work itself out. But people in the past really knew intimately how dangerous it could be, and they just did not fuck around with it. So, I think that they were a lot more willing to, do various medical interventions when things went wrong, even up until birth. If things went terribly wrong, doctors were trained to, do all different kinds of, like later on kind of surgical interventions and things as well. And I won't go into too terrible detail with that because it is really
Yeah.
disgusting and it might make people
Yeah.
upset. But it is something that they were aware of and that they were willing to do.
Mhm.
They would never willingly let a woman die in childbirth. If it
Right.
came down to like the mother versus like a child or a fetus, they would always choose the woman. They would always save the woman's life first. That was the
Mhm.
priority. Women were not lining up to die in childbirth. And doctors, their families, they didn't want them to. If they had interventions, they would take them if they could. So these books will have all these different things that people would try to do
Mhm.
if they knew for sure that something was going wrong. Or even if there wasn't something going wrong, if it was early enough and you just didn't want to be pregnant anymore, then they had interventions for that too. And these were very normal books, very common. You could buy them anywhere. Pretty much every household had one. Most people knew what to do if this kind of thing came up.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also like, the old adage of like, oh, people didn't get divorced back then. It's like, no, but your grandmother had her garden,
Yep.
and she used her
Yeah.
garden.
Household poisons. Yeah. And,
Right.
for a long time as well, even if people didn't necessarily get divorced, it was also really common to just like abandon your spouse. Like, if you're not having a good time, you can just fuck off and like no one will ever
No
know.
one's gonna,
You can move
right.
2 counties over, start over again. Nobody's going to know that you have a wife in Nebraska or whatever, and nobody really
Right.
cares. You can have spouses in more than one place and no one will ever find
Yeah.
out. So if you mutually agree that it isn't working out, I mean, sometimes people would just split up and no one really cared.
Yeah. Yeah. People are a lot more chill. People were still
People are
people.
way more
I think
chill.
that's it's so it's so easy to forget that people are always people and people are the same.
Yeah,
It's the
and
same
they
way we
really
have
are.
like the earliest graffiti that we have is like, sex jokes. And
Yes.
yeah, people
Yeah.
have always been the same, and it's this danger of trying to create this narrative that people 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago were drastically different than they are
Hmm.
today. When really all that's
Yeah.
different is, the technology that we have
Yeah.
access to.
No, 100%. People are always people, as you say. Of course, times change and the specifics about, what you're worried about or, what's going on politically, like that
Hmm.
changes. But like the basics never change, right? People they want companionship, they want food, they want shelter, they want to be safe, they want to have a job that supports themselves, maybe one that they don't hate if they're lucky. Like all this basics, like this is the stuff that people, it's the stuff that they want. And sex is very much a part of that. That is I mean, it's like like the one of the strongest biological needs,
Hmm.
and it's not something that you can kind of guilt yourself out of wanting, right? Like it's innate, it's hormonal, like when you really want it, like it's like trying to stop a freight train, like you can't just be like,
Right.
oh, well, people just knew that abstinence was better, so they always abstained, or oh, the church said no, so of course they didn't. Bullshit.
Right.
Like people have always been horny, right? And
Yeah.
it's not like socially programmed into you. Like it is literally like it's in your body. It's physical, right? It's
Right.
hormonal. You can't get away from that. So anyway, it's something that people have always, had to think about is if they don't want to have children, how are they going to prevent that? And the
Hmm.
idea that people in the past were just really good at abstaining, it just never rang true for me.
Hmm.
Like I just don't
Yeah.
think that was
No,
it.
people are horny. That's why you constantly like it's like you constantly see through history there's like a new leader being like a new religious leader, a new political leader trying a new way of banning it. And it's like, why do they
Hmm.
have to keep doing it? Why do they have to
Yeah.
keep doing it? Why do you have to put this rule into place if people are not doing it, you know?
Right, right, exactly. And that's the thing too, when you look at these wonderful historical romances and other, kind of historical books, especially people writing about like the Regency period, I
Yeah.
think a lot of people fixate on these ideas like, oh, everybody was very well behaved back then, and there were these very strict social rules, and everybody followed them. But
Yeah.
the reason that there were so many of these manuals for, conduct and for how you're supposed to behave in society, it wasn't because everybody acted the right way. It was because nobody did.
Yeah.
And when you actually look at how these people were behaving,
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, you might have like a couple of sheltered people, but people were running around doing the craziest shit, you know? Like they were not necessarily well behaved. Like these conduct manuals are
No.
trying to correct that
Right.
because they see it as a problem. It's not that everybody
Right.
was just perfect all the time. Of course they weren't. We never have been.
Right. Right. You see today, like nobody writes a self-help book about a problem that they don't think exists. right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants like, all right, everybody's doing that. That's great. Like there's no like positive affirmation self-help book that's just like, yeah, you're doing a great job exactly what you're doing. It's
Yep.
this is all the things that you need to change.
And if people get told to do something in church, just because you might believe or you might have faith or church might be important to you, that doesn't mean that you 100% obey it across the board, right? Like the idea is that like people are like automatically sinners at birth, right? They don't expect you to do all of those things to the letter. They want you to try, but it doesn't mean that everybody's going to. So that's something that people get wrong about the Middle Ages too, because they know that the church was so central, to the community and to people's beliefs and to the way that things worked. They think that, oh, well, everybody must have followed their instructions to the absolute letter, and they
Right.
really didn't. They
Not
really
even the
didn't.
priests, not even the religious
No.
leaders did, you know what I mean?
No,
Like,
not at all. And the Middle Ages is such a fun time period to study too, because one of my favorite sources that you get from around this time, they're called penitentials, like penitential literature.
mhm.
The priests would be issued with these huge books that were just like a laundry list of different sins, every sin they could imagine that somebody could commit, right? Or things that they'd heard or things that they made up, and what the penance would be for each of these things. So these are things that they think that people are doing wrong, right? And it's not just contraception and abortion, although those things are in there, and that's what interests
Right.
me. But in these chapters, you get the craziest things, like don't do sex magic with fish, don't astral
Oh my God.
project. Yeah, that's a real one. Don't celebrate the new year. Don't you know oh my gosh, some of these are so funny.
Yeah.
Don't enchant oats and then make bread on your butt to make somebody fall in love with you. That's a real one.
What?
Crazy, crazy stuff, right? So, you read this penitential literature, and this is stuff that either people have actually tried or, things that people, the priest had heard rumors of people trying, or things that like
Right.
maybe they had just imagined because they had a bit too much time on their hands. But these are
Right.
all of the sins that they think that people are doing at the time, right? So it just goes to show you that people are like very much not behaving the way that they're supposed to, right?
They're
And in
freaks.
more
People are
creative
freaks.
ways than today, really.
Bread on your butt.
Oh
Incredible.
yeah, that's a really weird one. There's okay, so this amazing book, it's called Burkhardt Decretum. This is one of my favorite historical sources of all time. There's one chapter specifically called The Sins of Women, and it
Okay.
goes into all of these different things that they think that women are doing, and about half of them are sex magic. So one of them was
Yeah, of
about
course.
making a specific type of magic bread, right? And
Okay.
it has, oats and honey, and you mix it together. But you're not just putting the intention into the bread. You actually like knead it on somebody's butt. Like somebody's supposed to like knead the bread like on your bare ass, right? And then you bake it into a loaf and give it to a man so he'll fall in love with you. Right? And this is what like I want to
Well,
say
at least the
10th
baking
century Germany.
sanitizes it.
At least they're baking it. And there's a really disgusting one with the fish. But there's a
Oh,
bunch of
yeah.
them like that. So these are all things that they think that women are doing. And what's great is that you see, what the
Incredible.
penance is, according to whatever the so-called sin is. So you see how bad they consider it to be, right? So one of the
Mm.
things that I go into in my book is they have the penance for abortion, which is not that bad. So if you go by what the penance is, you can see all of the sins that they consider to be worse than abortion, right? So, I mean, one of
Hmm.
those things is like
Yeah.
celebrating the new year. Like having a New Year's party is worse than having an abortion. But there's a whole list of them in the book. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting. So, like yes, they considered having an abortion to be a sin, but there were a lot of other things that were sins too, and they were considered worse sins. Eating
Right.
food with Jewish people was considered to be a worse sin than having an abortion.
Yeah.
No bagels for you, or or whatever
Tragic.
the case
Like,
may be. Yeah,
right.
I mean, that would upset me as well. But there were all these different, really normal,
Yeah.
everyday, totally fine things that were also considered to be really serious sins.
Yeah.
So in the hierarchy of how bad they are, it's just interesting, to
Yeah.
see what they kind of condemned.
And yeah, it's interesting to see like how just like how little has changed as well. And I think you see this like in Bombshell as well, like in the
Hmm.
book. And I think this is part of the appeal of historical romance as well, is like you can talk about all of these issues, both like reproductive care, but like women's rights and like class issues and, racism and all of these, really deep subjects. And we talk about them in the context of the past because that feels a little bit safer. But there
Yeah.
is still the through line of like, you'd have to be blind not to realize how this is still happening today. You'd have to be blind to read Bombshell and not be like, oh, wow, like I could insert the names of like real people
Hmm.
acting today in place of like the villains and the heroes, and it would be a very similar story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, historical fiction, historical romance, it does give us that space to examine these things, from a place of safety. If you can remove yourself from that period, you can say a lot without, necessarily being super, super obvious or pointed about it. But I think Sarah MacLean is great because, she looks at a lot of these issues, a lot of things that people are dealing with right now, and she handles it in a way that is very natural, and very truthful. I think a lot of
Hmm.
people will be able to, I mean, as you say, like recognize the issues in this book, and I just appreciate the way that she handles it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always done with like it's very careful
Yeah,
the way she does. She's very intentional with everything.
but also very clear. Very,
Yes.
I thought it was great. I love the book.
You cannot walk away from this book and be like, I wonder what she meant by that. Because she's very
Hmm.
much like, I'm gonna like throw a bomb, like in one of Imogen's bombs of information at you, like in case it wasn't
Yeah.
clear. Let me emphasize.
And just to be more specific, because I feel like we're being very general, but one of the points that I really appreciated in this book, especially
Mhm.
living in Britain right now, is in the place she has this wonderful group of women, and it's very ethnically diverse. And she is
Mhm.
making the point that even in the 1830s, London was a very diverse place. And
Right.
now in England, people are, well, not everybody, but like the Reform Party and some people are making a huge stink about immigration.
Yeah.
It
I mean,
happens, on social
Brexit.
media all the time. And yeah, Brexit, and people like to think like, oh, well, Britain in the past, it was just white people. It was never diverse. And that is just the biggest load of crap.
Yeah.
And I mean, Britain has been very diverse, from the beginnings of London, right? It started as a Roman outpost. They
Yeah.
brought in sex workers from all over the world, like to begin with. It was incredibly diverse, and it always has been, right? Britain is this,
Mhm.
I mean, it was a huge empire. London specifically is a wonderful melting pot. And I think that, Sarah has made this great point that London at this time was
Mhm.
actually incredibly diverse. And I,
Mhm.
I appreciate that in historical romance. Because, and I'm not trying to like diss, anybody writing right now, but, like some of these kind of more traditional authors, they'll write
Mhm.
about like like just the aristocracy, just rich white people. And the
Mhm.
assumption is just that nobody else existed or nobody else was important. And I really love the
Mhm.
authors who write about people who are not only rich or who are not only white, people
Mhm.
who are maybe from other backgrounds or, like other classes or whatever the case may be. And in
Mhm.
this one, you've got the place, right? And you have all of these women coming together from different backgrounds. They have different jobs. Some of them are queer, some of them are
Yeah.
raising hell in various ways, and
Yeah.
they can all exist together in a way that feels very natural. And anybody listening to this, I don't want you coming away from this feeling like that is one of those, too modern inserts, right? Because it's
Yeah.
not, because
No.
London has always been very diverse like that. And I think that that's wonderful, and seeing that represented is very satisfying.
Yeah, yeah, it's really lovely. And it was funny because I was finishing this book yesterday, which was listener for because you're listening to this a little bit in the future. It was June 1st, and the first thing that I started listening to, like the scene that I picked up on is one of the I think it may be like the first like sex scene in the groundskeeper's cottage. And Cecily's like, yeah, I've hooked up with men and I've hooked up with women. And I was like,
Mhm,
Sesily Talbot, my bisexual queen,
mhm.
like happy pride to me. um,
Yeah. Yeah. Hell
bisexual
yeah.
queen Cecily. I was honest, like when I like the first two chapters, I was like, but what if Cecily was a lesbian? I was like, I love Caleb, but like, what if this book, like, I would like someone to write this book, but Cecily is like, she has thrown off the shackles of all of society's constraints except for like compulsory heterosexuality. And like, that's the journey that
Right.
she takes. And like, I love
Yeah.
Caleb and I fully believe in their love story. As a bisexual person myself, I fully support Cecily and her bisexual life. But I was like, what
Yeah.
if this was sapphic?
I thought that was great too, and that's another one of those things, that kind of compulsory heterosexuality.
Right.
I mean, I want to say that that's totally modern. That is not necessarily the right way to put it. But what I want to say is that people in the past were a lot more accepting of bisexuality, even
Mhm.
though that there wasn't really a label for it.
Right,
Just, like
exactly.
same-sex relationships and encounters. It was just part of, like normal life. And
Yeah.
people, could accept it to greater or lesser degrees. I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to say that people never had, complications from that. I mean, particularly like gay men throughout history have obviously
Yeah,
experienced
exactly.
some horrible, horrible things. But women could get away with a lot. A lot of
Yeah.
women, their first sexual partner or partners were other women. And
Yeah.
for a lot of history, people just did not give a single shit,
Yeah.
and they wouldn't consider themselves bisexual. It's just like, well, why
Right.
wouldn't I make out with my friend? That sounds
Like,
great.
what do you mean? We're sleeping in the same bed together, we're cuddling.
Like,
Like, why
so
wouldn't we
what?
kiss a little? Okay.
Yeah, like that's totally fine. And people were fine with that because I mean, you can't get pregnant with another woman, right? So like, who cares? And that was a lot more accepted, and like lots of men would have encounters or relationships with other men. And as long
Hmm.
as you aren't necessarily broadcasting it, I mean, that I think that was
Right.
probably accepted to a greater or lesser degree, but they wouldn't
Hmm.
necessarily consider themselves to be like homosexual, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
So, but I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not an expert on this kind of history. I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression about any
No,
of these
no,
things,
no.
but I do fully encourage you to, get into that history and of
Hmm.
course appreciate that, it is not as black and white as you may have been led to believe.
Yeah. One of the books I really like about that listener, I've talked about on the podcast before, but it's called Female Husbands. I'm completely blanking
Jen
on the
Mannion.
Jen Minion.
Yes.
Yes. That's a great entry point if you
Uh-huh.
want to like read about gender fluidity in
Yes, that
the
was
past.
such a fantastic book.
Hmm.
And that one is really interesting. We did a little bit about it on Dirty Sexy History. And
That might
yeah,
have
the
been where
author
I
Jen
heard it
Mannion.
from. It might
Oh
have
yeah,
been
it might
like
have been.
from Dirty Sexy History.
It might have been, yeah. Well, if it was, that's awesome. I'm so pleased. And then my work here is done. So yeah, it was very, very interesting. Jen Mannion had found all of these instances where women had been allowed to marry each other as long as one of them was willing to be, male presenting. And it's difficult to say for sure, like was
Right.
this person a trans man or were they quite happy to be a woman, just kind of fulfilling that role? We don't really know. We can't ask them.
Yeah.
But there were a number of actual marriages that took places in church, right? But
Right.
between people who were women or a woman and a trans man.
Hmm.
And this happened. So it's a wonderful, wonderful book.
Yeah.
The research is impeccable, and the people in it are so fascinating. So again, that's Female Husbands by Jen Mannion. I 100% recommend it to anyone.
Yeah. 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 And it just goes to show like even if they absolutely weren't using, I mean, you see this not even just with sexuality and gender, but like with race, with class, like historically people were never using the same terminology and using the same
Yeah, not at all.
lenses that we use today.
Mhm.
But they were still at, in terms of like fundamental how people lived and acted and loved and thrived, there is
Mhm.
still like there's a fundamental like through line throughout history for
Mhm.
all of these varying identities and varying experiences that connects to, what is happening today to what was
Mhm.
happening hundreds of years ago.
100%. And that is one of those challenging things too. When you do start doing this research, is just understanding that the definitions have really changed.
Hmm.
That is particularly relevant when you look at the history of abortion. So,
Hmm.
people will say, oh, well, abortion has always been condemned. But what's interesting is that
Hmm.
the definition of abortion has changed, right? So
Yeah.
while it's true that the church, well, generally speaking, the church has always condemned abortion. What's important to note is that what they considered to be abortion was only something taking place after quickening. So that was kind of like 4 or 5 months into a pregnancy. What they would consider abortion would be, like what we would think of as like a late term abortion, right?
Hmm.
Like something that would happen, when the woman is more likely to die as a result of it, and when, if she were to give birth, like a child would be more likely to survive. But anything taking place within that first 4 to 5 months of a pregnancy, that was not even defined as abortion. That was
Right.
this kind of legal gray area. And, for a lot of history, people kind of thought of it as like part of contraception because people didn't really know,
Yeah.
like, when does a pregnancy really begin? Nobody could
Right.
agree when
Exactly.
does life begin? People can't agree
Right.
about it now. So, but really anything like taking place, like if you had an abortion within the first kind of like 4 months of a pregnancy, nobody gave a single shit. And they didn't even think it was like
Yeah.
actually an
Didn't
abortion.
actually
They
count.
just thought it was kind
Right.
of, like regulating your menstruation. And that's like a really normal, really healthy thing to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. And for those of you
Hmm.
listener, the quickening, that's called like the 4 to 5 months is called the quickening, right? And that's like when you start feeling movement. So like when your baby starts to
Yeah.
kick is basically when they
Yeah.
considered.
So exactly. So like it usually takes place kind of like 4 to 5 months into a pregnancy, which is roughly in line with like fetal viability towards the top end of that, right?
Right.
It's when a pregnant person can detect fetal movement, just kind of walking around, oh my God, the baby kicked, right? That's quickening. So anything before that, who's to say you're even pregnant, right? Like they had
Right.
urine-based pregnancy tests in ancient Egypt and then they lost them. So for hundreds and hundreds and
Hmm.
hundreds of years, you know, quickening was the first proof you had that you were pregnant. So
Right.
anything before that, it would just be self-reported from the woman anyway. So if she didn't
Right.
tell anybody, nobody's going to know. The doctor's not going to know.
Right.
There's no way to check. So if
Right.
it's just like, well, my period's late this month, that, anything could cause that. I'm going to take
Right.
these herbs or I'm going to do this thing to bring it on, then that's considered to be like a completely normal, very healthy thing to
Yeah.
do. We don't know how many of them were aware that they were probably having very early abortions. Not all of them necessarily were, but a lot of them were.
Yeah.
We don't know if they were super, super aware of that or not, but that is definitely
Hmm.
what was going on. Because, of course, the number one thing that causes a late period is pregnancy, right? And the
Hmm.
different things that they would do to bring that on, most of these things that they were ingesting were like herbal abortifacients.
Hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Or like like you talk about in the book, like pomegranates are super rich in estrogen.
Yeah, now pomegranates are an interesting one. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so what I will say with definitions, what gets tricky is, historically what was considered to be contraceptive or what was considered to be like an abortion, right? So in the book, I try to use our definitions so people understand.
Mm.
So we can look at pomegranates and the way that they use them and understand that they were using them as contraception and abortion. So, depending on how you use them and what point in your cycle you use them, you could use it for either purpose. So, pomegranates contain a lot of naturally occurring estrogen. So, what they would do is it's not just like eating a lot of, like pomegranate seeds or
Yeah.
drinking a lot of the juice. Most of the estrogen is in the inside of the rind. So what they would do is they would grate it together and
Uh-huh.
mix it into like a little kind of like a tampon with honey, and they would insert that, and that would actually, prevent you from
Yeah.
getting pregnant. And there is actually a community in India today that still uses that as their primary form of
Yeah.
contraception. So it's very, very, very interesting. And of course, like some of these ancient physicians, ancient writers were recommending different things that you could do with pomegranate in case your period
Mhm.
was late as well. So yeah, it really is the
Yeah.
true superfruit.
The true,
So
yep. And
Yeah,
delicious to boot. I do.
and
I like
delicious.
myself a little bowl of pomegranate seeds, but I will
Yes.
continue to take my pill every day
Yes, please
as
do,
well.
because that is a lot more effective. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The part of the book that I thought was, most exciting, just because of my research interest is, when Cecily is saying to Caleb, look, I've decided I don't want to have children, and you don't have to worry about it, but I am taking measures to prevent that from happening. I thought that was really interesting, and I got to talk to Sarah about it a few years ago, and she said that when she was writing it, that she was imagining that Cecily probably had an IUD of some sort. And
Hmm.
that, kind of she thought like, I know that that's not accurate to the period, but I can do what I want. And I agree with that. I think that's great. But what's interesting about that is that if it was an IUD, she wasn't too far off, right? So the earliest IUD that we are aware of actually comes from ninth century Persia, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so they're not as modern as you would think. So there was one physician that wrote at the time of a kind of probe that they would make out of like tightly wound paper, and I
Uh-huh.
believe it was soaked in ginger water, and you would put it like inside the cervix to prevent pregnancy. And that doesn't seem to have caught on. It sounds very painful and
Okay.
not very nice.
Yeah.
But towards the end of the 19th century, they started experimenting with IUDs again. So the modern IUD, like as we know it, it really started to be, kind of developed towards the beginning of the 20th century. But towards the end of the 19th, people saw the potential, as a contraceptive or even as a means of abortion, and people were experimenting with IUDs. They would have these objects called stem pessaries, which I mean could also be used for, something like a uterine prolapse, but they're basically like a self-inserted, like temporary IUD. You could order them from the Sears catalog. They're very
Yeah.
common. And one person even filed a trademark application for like one that we would think of now, and I believe it had like a spring-loaded insertion device, so
Oh,
you could like shoot it into your uterus at home.
all right.
Again, do not do this at home. That sounds like a terrible idea.
That sounds like a great way for a tear.
Yeah, a really
Yeah.
good way to hurt yourself really, really badly. But people
Yeah.
were really interested in IUDs and their potential. Marie Stopes was absolutely obsessed with them. But of course, that was kind of like the 1920s. But
Hmm.
I was thinking about all these different things that Cecily might have been doing, right? And this isn't just magical thinking, because back in the 1830s, there were a lot of different methods that she could have been using on her
Hmm.
own. Of course, the biggest thing, sort of like the 1830s and onward throughout the 19th century, people became absolutely obsessed with the idea of like coitus interruptus and coitus
Hmm.
reservatus, where the man, doesn't only not come inside the vagina, he just doesn't come at all, right? People were
Yeah.
writing books about the theory and practice and philosophy and religious applications of not coming, right? But it was
Yeah.
only for men. They thought that it was really unhealthy for women to be abstinent. They really thought that sexual activity was necessary for women. So, of course, this is something that, Caleb would have to participate in. But if it was something that Cecily was doing herself, right, what can she
Hmm.
do? So, at the time, sponges were very popular for women. But the main thing that was happening in the 1830s was this guy, Charles Knowlton. He was a doctor from Massachusetts. He wrote this incredible book called Fruits of Philosophy, right? This is one
Okay.
of these so-called like physiology manuals, which is basically a sex
Yeah.
education book. And the whole book is all about how to like douche as a form of birth control, right? So they would sell these different, like syringes
Right.
for like washing yourself out. And they had been, sold for, I mean, almost 200 years at that point that we know of. And, people would put in, different kinds of solutions. They would put in, like water or different kind of vegetable solutions. But this guy, Charles Knowlton, wrote this whole book about how to do it and all the different things that you can mix in the water to, prevent pregnancy. So it's possible that she could have been doing something like that. She could have been using
Yeah.
sponges. There were over-the-counter so-called women's medications that
Yeah.
she
Female
might have been using.
pills.
Uh-huh. Yeah, female pills, lunar pills, French
Mhm.
renovating pills, all these different things they call them. A lot of them were marketed as laxatives, but they weren't actually
Interesting.
laxatives. All different
Yep.
kinds of things like that. Um, What else? Condoms were definitely used at that time. Of course, Caleb would have
Hmm.
been aware of that.
And that was also, wasn't it like because they have the sheepskin condoms,
Hmm.
right? They've had those for a while. Those are
Yeah.
touch and go on how effective they are.
Yeah.
But was it, I feel like it was like the end of the 1830s when like the first rubber condom, or was it like a decade later? It's like somewhere in the mid
It was
19th
right around
century,
there.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charles Goodyear with vulcanized rubber, that one of the first applications that they thought of for things to do with rubber was actually to make condoms. And Goodyear
Hmm.
put out this whole pamphlet of all of the different uses for vulcanized rubber. And one of those, he said that, you can make condoms from it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that was definitely more effective than the sheepskin ones. So the sheepskin ones are very interesting. The kind of earliest modern condoms, as we would think of them, like the first ones were made out of linen, right? And then
Hmm.
they started making them out of leather after that, which I mean, as you can
Hmm.
imagine, is very uncomfortable. And then the sheepskin ones, London produced tons of them. A lot of them were manufactured by this woman or this brand using this woman's name called Mrs. Phillips. So around this time, everybody was using
Mm.
Mrs. Phillips machines, which was a euphemism for condoms. And they were made out of, like fish gutter, sheepskin, and, sheep
Yeah.
intestines, that kind of thing. And what's cool about them is that like almost anybody can make them. And the process is really disgusting, but you don't have to have a huge factory to do it. Like people would do it, like in their house. They could go into business for themselves selling condoms, on a kind of a small scale. People have found some surviving condoms from this period, and I believe it was the
Hmm.
British Museum that tested them. But what they found is that they weren't as disgusting as they would sound. I mean, like, okay, so don't
Hmm.
get me wrong, they were disgusting because you would reuse them, right? But they would,
Yikes.
they would unroll them and they would test them. And they think that they actually probably could have been quite effective. So
Mm.
they came in different sizes, so you'd have to make
Hmm.
sure that you get one that fit quite well. And they were actually thinner than latex condoms are
Oh,
today. So they
wow.
think that they might have even been like quite comfortable if you got one that fit properly. There are indications that they might have been quite effective at preventing pregnancy, but they were not effective at preventing syphilis because there are these
Hmm.
tiny, tiny pores,
Yeah.
in the sheep gut,
Right.
and syphilis can get through, but sperm can't, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so really interesting.
hit or miss.
Hit or
Yeah.
miss, mostly miss. That
Yeah.
sounds kind of
Mostly
gross,
miss.
but they did exist, and they were quite popular. There are even letters, like throughout the 19th century, lovers, married people writing to each other saying like, "Oh, I can't wait to see you. Please make sure and bring condoms." So like we know that like normal people were using them.
Yeah. Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have any other romance novels besides this one with contraceptives, birth control, or that like have an abortion on page?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And oh my gosh, I feel so bad because I can't remember the title. I know Adriana Herrera has one where one of her heroines has a women's health clinic in Paris.
A tropical rebel gets the Duke.
That's the one, right? Okay. I
Yes.
almost said Caribbean Heiress, and it's not that one.
No,
Okay,
that's the
yeah.
first one in the series. So yeah.
Right, right, right. Yeah, and I knew it was her, and I was so pleased that she had put that in there, and I was so excited. And I haven't read it in a little while, and I couldn't remember what the title was, but I remember that, and I thought that was awesome. I was so pleased that she did that. There was one years and years and years ago, but it wasn't the best representation. I think it was called Mara's Dream, and I can't
Mm,
remember who the author was, but it was quite a sad story, and I think it was ultimately a
mm,
romance about an Irish immigrant coming to New York, and I
mm,
believe that she had an abortion in the book. But I mean,
hmm.
I don't know if it came out in the 70s or the 80s. I read this a really
Yeah.
long time ago, and I can't remember who the author was, and I feel terrible about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't see it happening too often in
No.
romance. I think people like the fantasy. They don't want to think about it, which I totally understand. But I do think it's important that we think about these things.
Yeah. I had a few that I found, some of which I've read, some of which I haven't. But Katie
Really?
Roberts, The Kraken Sacrifice,
Ooh, I haven't read that yet.
has an abortion on page. I'm pretty sure, like, I don't know, I don't think it like goes through, but like I think the character gets an abortion in the book. Um,
Okay.
And then Run Rabbit by C.M. Niscosta, they're werewolves and they like fuck during the full moon. And then the female werewolf is like, I do not have time to like, she's also a high-powered attorney, I think. But it's it's part of her Morning Glory milking farm like universe. So
Okay,
but
okay.
she's like, I do not have time for a child right now. Like we are not we would not make good parents. Like so I'm doing it. And then the
Yeah.
one I haven't read this one, but it's part of like a multi-page series, but it's Abigail Barnett. Um, the first book is I think when she gets pregnant, and then it's called The Boss, and then the second book is called The Girlfriend, and that has an abortion like on paid, like you get the full experience of like her getting the
Wow.
abortion on page. There's also a lot of BDSM because I think it was written in response to like 50 Shades of Grey not being good
Fair.
BDSM rep.
Yeah.
'Cause I think it's from like 2012. And I haven't read that one, but I did see like a lot of people being like it has like takes you through the like step by step of her getting the abortion on page, which I thought was really cool.
That's amazing. That's really, really cool. I will say my first romance that I wrote called Tyburn has
Mm.
condoms and it has like a traumatic abortion in a flashback.
Hmm.
These are, I mean, it was just part of the fiction. This is not like hyper realistic or anything. It was
Yeah.
just part of this book.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's it that one is like somewhere between like historical fiction, historical romance. And I mean, I'm
Yeah.
fully happy to admit that it's absolutely batshit, and some people really love it and some people don't, and that's fine. You don't have to read it. But I did want to represent condoms in it.
Yeah.
And they are in it. It's not perfectly historically accurate. I mean, I know I do history now, but I mean, it was really just kind of for fun. But I always appreciate when people do include these things. And, I hope that, with this history book that I've written now with Forbidden Fruit, I hope that this will, give authors the confidence to include this stuff if they think that there's a place for it in their fiction. Because there are so many different things that people used to try. And, a lot of these things were very accessible, this knowledge, it was everywhere. And of course, some of it is really funny. In the Middle Ages in Italy, there was one book that said that you should wear weasel testicles to prevent
Uh,
pregnancy, right? Like wear them like
uh,
as like an amulet around your neck.
I mean, it would prevent pregnancy insofar as it like would make you less attractive,
Yeah, yeah. Like
probably
it
less
would it
likely
would
to
make
have
people like
sex.
think twice. Well, the best part of that too is that like the woman is supposed to catch the weasel, remove the testicles, and then release the weasel without killing it, which I think is
Okay.
great. But I mean, also you're gonna have like a really pissed off weasel.
Right. Like you're also
Yeah.
gonna get bitten by the weasel, I would imagine,
Yeah,
quite a lot.
yeah, I would think so. And yeah, I mean, some of the things that people tried are absolutely insane and definitely wouldn't have worked. And some of them are just, kind of like magic, or one of them is like take a piece of a uterus from a lion and wear it in a
Mm,
little tube tied around your ankle. Like weird, weird stuff, right? That definitely didn't work. But then, I
right.
mean, for every like weird thing, there are 10 things that were probably pretty effective. And it wasn't
Mm.
always tea, like sometimes it was like magic oatmeal, right? Like there's this amazing woman, the Countess of Kent. She's one of the
Hmm.
people in the book, and
Yeah.
she had this lifelong affair, outside of marriage, this very, very long, exciting love affair. And
Good
she
for her.
never got pregnant. She never, ever had children. Well,
Hmm.
I shouldn't say she never got pregnant. She never had children, at least, as far as,
Yeah.
oh, you know. But she had this special recipe for oatmeal that would, prevent pregnancy. And it
Wow.
wasn't just the oats, it had a lot of parsley in it.
I
And
see.
parsley
Yeah.
is one of the herbs that keeps coming up that people were using for abortion and for
Yeah.
pregnancy prevention. It's
Hmm.
because in the roots of parsley, you can boil it down and you get this substance called apiol, which is very, very
Mm.
effective. And they actually used it in medications, for that purpose until the 20th century. So it's
Yeah.
it's interesting stuff. But this was back in, I believe it was the 16th century. And she
Mm.
was eating this, I call it magic oatmeal because to me it's magic,
Yeah.
but no, there was actually a science behind it. And she
Yeah.
never had kids. So,
That's incredible.
mm,
I love that for her. I love her getting her
yeah.
Her getting her kicks and not having children.
Yeah, yeah, and she did. And after her husband passed away, she married her boyfriend and left him everything. So it's a really interesting story. And she was a
Noah?
court favorite too, so she had a lot of influence.
Yeah.
Everybody loved her and her interesting recipes. She was a very influential person in the court.
Right. Right. Well, when you're
Yeah.
the one that knows the magic oatmeal recipe,
Yeah.
they keep
Hmm.
you around.
Yeah, for sure. So sounds like
Amazing.
it's pretty effective. And what's funny about the oatmeal recipe too is we have evidence of people using it as late as like 18th century Philadelphia as well. So it
Oh.
came up a couple of times. So anyway, the book has all of these different things in it. Lots of
Hmm.
different things that people were using. Some that worked, some that didn't, some disgusting things, a lot of disgusting things. But I do hope that people see it as a good resource, and
Hmm.
I hope that authors feel empowered to use this stuff in their fiction, and to have that confidence that this is something that people
Hmm.
actually tried. But then, of course, in real life, do not ever try this at home. The whole book, it's all to say, look at everything that we've been through. Look at how far we had to come
Hmm.
to have the birth control that we have today.
Right.
Our ancestors could only dream of this stuff, and they would not
Hmm.
want you eating the magic oatmeal. They would want you taking your pill.
Yeah.
So we need to
Right.
be very grateful for what we have,
Yeah.
and we need to fight to maintain access to it,
Yeah.
and to continue to develop these things, and to keep them safe and to make them safer and to make them accessible to everybody who wants them. Sex education, and of course, all of these different kinds of contraceptives, and the abortion pill. We need to maintain access to
Yeah.
all of those things for everyone.
Yeah, I mean that's I've heard it said many times before. I think you say it in the book too, banning abortion doesn't stop abortion, just stops
It
safe
doesn't.
abortion. And
Hmm.
the only thing that is guaranteed, and it wasn't because I went to a Catholic university. I'm not Catholic myself, but I was like working some event and they had a panel, and one of the questions that came up was like abortion in the church. And there was like a priest who like sat up there and he was like, listen, I don't care how you feel about abortion. If you genuinely want to stop it, like if our goal is to stop abortion, the thing we need to be doing is promoting sex ed and
Yes.
making contraceptive more accessible. He's like, that's it.
Yes.
That's the only thing that's going to work. And
Yeah.
that's it. You know what I mean? Like people are
Hmm.
never going to not have sex,
Yeah.
but if you enable them to have safe sex, it creates a safer environment for everybody.
It does. It does. And they've proven that too. And in the couple of decades in America, and people like to think that like in the past abortion was always illegal, and that's not true. The amount
Right.
of time that abortion was actually legal is relatively short when you look at the grand scheme of things. But in those few decades that abortion was illegal in the United States, the numbers were way higher than they are today, right? So back in the 1890s, for example, right, one out of every three pregnancies ended in abortion, and that was even when it was illegal in, I think, every
Hmm.
state. But now it's like one in five, and that is way, 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 way better.
Right.
And they have proven, over and over again that the best way to reduce the numbers of
Mhm.
abortion, if that's something that you want to do, is to, promote access to
Yeah.
effective and affordable contraception to everybody if they want it. And to, of course, have that comprehensive sex education so people, know how to take care of themselves, how to protect themselves, how to prevent pregnancy. And now, one of the things that really frightens me is we are seeing, this pretty powerful misinformation campaign on a lot of social media. And you'll see it too, next time you log into, Threads or
Yeah.
Facebook or Twitter or whatever, there are all these women, kind of pretending to be wellness influencers saying, you don't need birth control. Birth control is bad for you.
Yes.
You can only
Yeah.
get pregnant one day a month. You don't need to worry about it. Those people are lying
Yeah.
liars who lie, and do not listen to them.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. No, I see that all the time. People are like, "Oh, go off your birth control. Like it was causing
Mhm.
all X, 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 and Y
Yeah.
health issue." And it's like, yeah, maybe I've been on birth control since I was 16. So I've been on birth control like almost half my life. Right. And I'm
Wow.
like, yeah, you know what? If it like is causing my or exacerbating my like anxiety or depression, you know what would exacerbate that even more? an unwanted pregnancy,
Yeah, yeah,
a
100%.
child.
Yeah. And that's not to say that everything is perfect. I mean, it definitely isn't.
Right,
People do have side
right.
effects, but there are a lot of different types of birth control. If one thing
Of
doesn't work, try
options.
something else,
Hmm.
And for example, I had a terrible experience with an IUD, but some people love IUDs and that really works for them, and
Yeah,
that's awesome. So I think that, we do need to be open about these things. We do need to talk about them. We need to destigmatize them so, that we can encourage the development of more methods and safer
hmm,
methods and work on these things to improve them. Maybe someday we will have pills that have absolutely zero side effects, and that would be awesome. I'd love to
that
see
would be
that.
wonderful.
But, it's a process, and we have come a long way since weasel testicles. And I think that that is something that we should all be happy about,
Something to be proud of.
something to
Yeah.
be
And you know
proud
what?
of.
Who knows? Maybe one day they'll actually start testing medication on female mice instead of just pretending like the hormones are making it too complicated. And then we'll
Yeah,
make
wouldn't
more
that be
leaps and
great?
bounds. Wouldn't it be
Yeah,
great
yeah, maybe someday we'll work on that.
if we didn't just treat women as men with boobs? Like that would be great.
Yeah. And they've only really been like working on like the birth control pill for about 100 years. Like it's only
Right.
been, in use and development for about that amount of time, which I mean, it sounds like a long time to us, but in the grand scheme of things, that's
Hmm.
nothing. We're still in the
Hmm.
early days, really. And I think that the fact that we have something that is really safe and effective in that time, I think it's a miracle. I think that's incredible.
Hmm.
And even if like I can't take certain types of pills because I have weird side
Yeah.
effects and things, that doesn't mean that they
Yeah.
shouldn't exist. It doesn't mean that other people shouldn't take them. I would absolutely encourage you, if that's something that you're interested in, to talk to your doctor and find something that works for you. Because like, contraception, it's power. It's not only about
Hmm.
like the choice is not only about the choice to have a baby or not have a baby. It's also about the ability to choose the kind of life that you want to have, and to choose when you want to have children, or if you want to have children, or
Yeah.
if you want to form this group like the Hell's Bells and go and rescue other women and,
Yeah.
do all these
Right.
things. And that's awesome. And to not have your life decided for you because of something
Hmm.
like biology. And
Yeah.
with my book, that's something that I want to appreciate, is that women have never been okay with that. Like we have always
Hmm.
tried to find ways to, control fertility and to make these
Hmm.
choices to the best of our ability. And have all these methods always worked? No, but some of them have, you know. And
Yeah.
the point is that people do, they keep trying, even if it means that they're putting their own lives or their own bodies on the line. People have always appreciated the need for this, that it is important, that it is something that we want, and people have been fighting for it for thousands of years. And now, we're seeing, some of these politicians try to introduce these bills that would actually ban birth control. There's this one in North Carolina that they're
Hmm. Yeah.
proposing at the moment, that if they passed it, and I don't honestly think that it's terribly likely, but if they passed it to say that legally life begins at fertilization, right? Not even conception, like fertilization, that would
Hmm.
automatically ban several types of birth control, not just
Hmm.
abortion. This would mean that like people couldn't take the pill,
Hmm.
people couldn't use IUDs, people couldn't take the morning after pill, right? This would ban
Hmm.
that stuff like overnight. So I don't think that we can ever take it for granted that we
Yeah.
have this kind of stuff. We
Hmm.
can't take it for granted that we have the right to use it or that it exists. We need to fight for it. We need to fight for the access to it, and make sure that people don't try to take it away from us, because the
Yeah.
the alternative is a lot worse. It's much, much
Yeah.
worse. And I mean, like I joke about weasel testicles, but I mean that's only going to hurt the weasel, right? And I don't think we should be
Right.
hurting weasels. But some of the other things that people tried were a lot more dangerous, and a lot of people died, and I don't ever
Hmm.
want us to go back to those days, you know.
Yeah.
So I really encourage people to be informed about what's going on, and to stand up for your rights and to fight for access to contraception for everybody.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And because bringing it back to romance novels, the
Hmm.
HEA, the thing that makes any HEA possible is freedom and choice
Yes,
to choose the kind of life that you want. You don't get the
right.
HEA without that. And for many women and people with uteruses, birth control, contraception abortion is vital to that freedom and choice.
Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you won't have kids someday. It just
Yeah.
means that you want to choose when is the right time and what the circumstances should be when you want to have them. You know, having a child at 16 is completely different than having one at 38. Like you should be able
Right.
to make those decisions and wait until you're ready,
Hmm.
and you should have the resources that will help you to do that.
Yeah.
And, one thing that you see all the time is people trying to argue that people who are in favor of abortion rights just don't want to have children ever. And that is certainly
No.
not the case. A lot of people who are very pro-choice are people who already have children, or who
Yeah.
want to have children later on. It's not that black and white. It's not team
No.
baby versus no baby, right? It's
Hmm.
about, people having the ability to make these decisions for themselves and to
Hmm.
always have the resources that they need to make the best
Hmm.
decisions possible, for
Yeah.
themselves, for their families, for their health.
Yeah. You have books like the Turnaway Study where they
Hmm.
followed women for years. And I think that if I'm remembering correctly, that book, like most of the people that they spoke to were women who already had children who were like, I
Yeah,
need to be able to take care of the children I already have, and that's why I'm getting an
yeah.
abortion. So,
Hmm. And certainly throughout history, a lot of the people that you see who are having abortions, a lot of them are women who already have multiple children that they're struggling to feed, and it's not even just women who are initiating it. There are several cases that we find as well where, like the men, their partners are also supporting them or facilitating it because they know that, as a family, they can't afford to have any more kids.
mhm,
Sometimes they already have three or four at home and they just, they can't afford to feed another person.
mhm,
And now you see this too, with the numbers of abortions happening, like in the United States, a lot of the people who are having them already have kids. So it's not just, all one way or the other. Another thing is I think that people don't appreciate is that, abortion is necessary, just to, like routine health care, like
mhm,
you have to have it even if you don't have people choosing it. It has to be available for when it does become medically necessary. And when you do pass these
mhm,
bans, that complicates that access. So if
mhm,
somebody is having, complications or somebody is having a miscarriage and they need some help, or an ectopic pregnancy or something like that. Obviously, the bans do not intend to include those cases, but they often do, or they cause
mhm,
enough confusion that people can lose their lives while they're waiting to access that care. So it
mhm,
is very important that we do, keep abortion legal and we do keep it safe. So when people need it, they can access it as quickly as possible.
mhm.
Because sometimes these are life or death situations, and
Yeah.
sometimes it does come down to somebody needs to act in 5 or 10 minutes. It's very, very quick. You can't
Right,
have
exactly.
doctors on the phone arguing with lawyers for 12 hours while somebody goes septic. So it's very, very important. And people in the past understood that as well.
Hmm.
There was never any question that abortion should be accessible to people if they were having pregnancy complications. Every pregnancy is not smooth and free of complications. Sometimes these
Right.
things happen, and it's really hard and it's tragic. But you don't want to lose the mother as well. And this is something that
Hmm.
people have always had to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for coming on and
Oh my
talking
gosh,
with
thank you so
me.
much for having me. I just hope that
Yeah.
made sense. I get so excited and I just talk.
No, I loved it. I loved every
Thank you
second of
so
it. It
much.
was so great. Listener, Forbidden Fruit comes out in January, but it is available to pre-order now. You can pre-order it from the bookshop.org link that'll be in the description of this episode.
Yeah, that would mean the world to me. Thank you so much, guys. And it's also on the Penguin Random House website. There's lots of
Yeah.
information about it and pre-order links to, as you say, bookshop or to, whatever
Mm.
your outlet of choice is. I
Preferred,
think you can
yeah.
even pre-order it at Walmart, which was mind-blowing to me,
That's
but I don't know how they're going to feel about it.
crazy.
But but if yeah, pre-orders are very, very much appreciated. It makes a huge, huge difference to me. And I hope that you guys all love it. It
Yeah.
was a labor of love. There's a lot of information in it. And
Yeah.
I wrote it for you. So I hope that you enjoy it.
Amazing. All right. And Jessica, where can they connect with you after this episode?
Oh, everywhere. I host the Dirty Sexy History podcast, which is pretty
Hmm.
easy to find. It streams on all major platforms. We are on a little break at the moment because I just wrote a book and moved to England, which took me a little bit longer than I thought. But we will be coming back. You can find me on social media. I am on Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram.
Hmm.
But you can also find me through my website, which is dirtysexyhistory.com. We have some great old blog posts on there. There's links to the podcast. There is a contact form. If you do have, any questions or if you want to reach out for any reason, you can find me on there. And I am kind of chronically, tragically online, so I'm pretty easy to find. But yeah, follow me, reach out. I love meeting people and talking to people. And I look forward to seeing you guys around.
And listener, as always, you can find the podcast on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, and TikTok at We Read It One Night. You can follow me personally at the Allison Finch on Instagram and Threads. You can email the podcast, we read it one night at gmail.com. If you have a guest topic or book that you would like to see covered, I really appreciate the recommendations. Slide into my email or my DMs. The best free ways to support the podcast, if you enjoyed this episode or any other, are to share it with your friends and family and or leave a rating and review wherever you listen to the podcast. And then if you have a little bit of extra room in your budget this month, you can support the podcast by buying me a coffee in the link in the description. You can buy any of the books we talked about in this episode from my bookshop.org storefront, also linked in the description. I earn a small affiliate fee every time you buy through that link. And you can also check out my Etsy shop, Evelyn and Adelaide. Adelaide is the same cat/Adelaide in the book we talked about today, Bombshell. Happy reading, happy listening. Godspeed, comrades.